Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm Nico. Welcome back to part 2 of my ranking every single FNAF fan games from worst to that I play on my channel from worst to the best. Now if you didn't see part 1, make sure to watch that before you watch this part, as I'll be leaving a link in the description below. So make sure to watch part 1, as this is part 2 of my ranking every single FNAF fan game that I've ever played on my YT from worst to the best. But with that said, we're going to be counting down the last 12 spots for the FNAF fan games. So with that said, let's get started. At number 12 today we have Pop Goes, which is going to be starting off our list, and the reason why it's not getting too much higher than a ranking of 12 is because, well, it's mainly really just because of the gameplay. This game does lure a lot more into the story, as the story of this game, although I don't understand, it's heavily involved with the Five Nights at Freddy's story, of course, and I appreciate that. And this game actually brought back my whole theory side of me as I tried to piece the puzzle of this game's lore to Five Nights at Freddy's, which it does very, very well. And the gameplay, although is unique, is kind of boring, especially on the beginning nights until you get to like around night 5 or 6 when things are actually somewhat difficult, as this game isn't all too difficult at all, as it's just a lot of remembering, as nights do tend to drag on for quite a while, and that's pretty much the only reason why it's getting a number 12 spot, as its story is really what carries it, and of course the unique gameplay is what brings it up forward, as it also, of course, like most of these FNAF fan games up until this point, they play very, very well. So, yeah. Anyways, with that said, let's get on to number 11. At number 11 today, we got Jolly 3 Chapter 2, which I am implying that I prefer Chapter 1 to Chapter 3, Chapter 2, which I'll get into in a little bit. But yes, the Jolly series up until this point becomes really, really good and popular as the gameplay starts to become a lot more unique. As Jolly 3 Chapter 2 works somewhat like Five Nights at Freddy's 3, as it's you versus Jolly and, of course, George, along with having to be able to fix your cameras, AC, and ventilation. You also have a radar and a jammer to stop the animatronics, as George you can actually see his eyes in the doorway, as for Jolly, you have to pay attention to him on the cameras, as these aren't the only two you'll see, as you'll actually see Maxie and Tweety as phantom versions of themselves, as you'll also have this really cool and unique FNAF 4 style file encryption section after each night, where you must encrypt multiple files while also keeping an eye on Rusty, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, which you gotta listen for breathing, and of course close or shine the light depending on if you hear breathing or not, which is really freaking cool. I love the unique balance of gameplay here. Definitely not better than Chapter 1 in my opinion, but it's still really good. Even has its own climactic ending, with you, of course, being able to semi-free roam through the building, making it past Jolly and George to get to the oxygen room, fix the oxygen, then make it to the elevator, where you then find none other than Springtrap, as the lore behind this is actually heavily connected to Five Nights at Freddy's 3, as you're actually playing as an employee who actually brings in Springtrap from this facility to FNAF 3, which I thought was extremely cool and interesting, and of course the gameplay is a lot of fun and definitely challenging unless you know what you're doing. But with that said, let's get on to number 10. Cracking into the top 10, we have Jollibees, which definitely is a huge change from the Jolly 3 Chapter 2, as this is actually comes after that, and is actually uniquely a sequel to actually Jolly 1, as the creator even says that Jolly 1 is not canon to Jolly 2, 3, or Chapter 2. Which is very freaking weird, but this, of course, expands the Jolly 1 game, as it is heavily connected to that, and it's very interesting with its gameplay, also, of course, being a lot like Sister Location, with some of the semi-free roam having to find your office, and then, of course, having to deal with each of the different animatronics going to each of their rooms at the end of every night in order to do a task, which I thought was really freaking cool, and the gameplay is, of course, very challenging unless you have specific strategy to do it, as there's multiple things that try to suffocate you, like checking Hetty, or of course the viruses and ads that are on the cameras constantly, which definitely adds a lot of panic to the game and challenge, as I personally enjoyed the challenge and really love the game. And the animatronic designs are extremely freaking creepy, as I hate humanoid animatronics, as these animatronics definitely bring in the uncanny vibe, which makes the game very stressful, and especially with their jump scares being very freaking creepy. Definitely a really good FNAF fan game, as it also has 4 different endings to get. Of course, ending with the canon ending, which involves you getting inside of Hetty, and then, of course, it going off, killing you, which ends up teasing Jollibee's Phase 2 afterwards, which is really freaking cool. So yeah, Jollibee's definitely deserves the top 10 spot. Let's get on to number 9. At number 9, we have One Night at Flumpty's 2, which is definitely a huge upgrade from One Night at Flumpty's 1, as there's a lot more mechanics, as this really does act like a FNAF 2, as FNAF, like, for FNAF, as a FNAF 2 to FNAF 1, as One Night at Flumpty's 2 is a huge improvement from the original game, which was already really good, giving us new mechanics like the vents, the light, and the exposure meter, as you must, of course, keep your exposure as low as possible by turning off the light when one of the characters gets into the room. And of course, keeps that really cool art style gameplay, and of course, is just somewhat of an improvement on that, as everything looks a lot more properly animated and all that, which looks really cool. Not saying that the first one wasn't properly animated, just that this is a huge step up from One Night at Flumpty's 1, and is a lot more challenging and chaotic than One Night at Flumpty's 1, as this game acts kind of like FNAF 2 to FNAF 1, as it really improves what FNAF One Night at Flumpty's 1 didn't have, and of course makes it more chaotic and extremely fun, especially introducing us to the hard boil mode, which is a harder mode than the original Night. But yeah, with that said, let's go on to the number 8 spot. Next up at number 8, we have Jollibee's Phase 2. Now, I was kind of depicting whether or not I should put this or Jollibee's Phase 1 over this, but I decided at the end of the day that Jollibee's Phase 2 is definitely better than the original, increasing the designs of the animatronics, which make them look even more creepy, as they look a lot more broken and a lot more detailed than their predecessors, which definitely adds a lot more to the creepy factor. Like I said, I disapprove of humanoid animatronics, as all they do is just creep me the heck out, which is why I really like the Jollibee games, as this also has a lot more of an interesting mechanics, with of course having that FNAF 6 completing your assignments to get through the night, as you must deliver each box before, of course, ending the night. And what makes this a lot more unique than Jollibee's Phase 1 is that it requires a lot of strategy, as there's an upgrade system where you get to create your own strategy, creating a lot more replay value, as if you play the game using one strategy, you can of course play it again if you want to using a different strategy, which is definitely a lot of fun, increases replay value, and the story, of course, connecting to Jollibee's and Jolly is really, really cool, as we also get a secret file which shows us the original designs of the Jolly 1 animatronics, as they were made to preserve human life, as said on the secret archive of this game, which is really freaking cool. I really love the lore of the Jolly franchise and Jollibee's Phase 2, even though the gameplay is somewhat lacking compared to the Jollibee's, at least in my opinion, it's still a lot more unique than Jollibee's, which is why I'm giving it the number 8 spot over Jollibee's. Anyways though, let's get on to number 7. At number 7, we have what I believe is the best One Night at Flumpty's game, One Night at Flumpty's 3, which again changes all the mechanics now from the second game, as you have a flash camera to flash the hallway or the vent, and of course stay warm mechanic, as you must get to the furnace to heat yourself, as you'll also see a lot of your old friends and from the previous games, including the fusion of the owl and the beaver, which is really freaking cool. Now, this game is a lot more better than the first 2 games, mainly because I love the gameplay a lot more. It's still really freaking challenging. The nights are as long as possible, and of course this is the most replayable One Night at Flumpty's game, as there's a total of 3 nights in this one. One being hard-boiled mode, the original night, and the new Flumpty night, as it's just a much difficult night, including all of the Flumpties, as there's not just one, but multiple Flumpties, as it also combines a lot of the gameplay from this new game's mechanics, and of course old mechanics from One Night at Flumpty's 1 and or 2. Really giving back to the old One Night at Flumpty's vibe with the doors, and of course bringing back the exposure meter of the second game. This is definitely what One Night at Flumpty's 1 and 2 are to get all together, but a lot better with its new mechanics, and honestly, I really love this game and seem to enjoy it the most. It is definitely the most difficult, especially with the Flumpty Night in the hard boil mode. Of course, bringing back those old game mechanics and of course adding a lot more on top of that. But yeah, definitely in my opinion, the best One Night at Flumpty's game in the trilogy. But with that said, let's get on to number 6. Next up at number 6, right before the top 5, sadly, is Jolly 3, which is definitely the best Jolly game in the entire series, as it is, I feel, is just like, it feels a lot like Sister Location, but if Sister Location was on steroids, with a very interesting plot, of course, and of course a lot of story with the, mini games and all that, and of course, the whole after night sequences, as you must go into each of the characters' rooms at the end of each night to obtain something, and of course fend them off in their own little mini games. As with Tweety, you must connect each of the wires and complete all of those connections in order to shut down the system. As with Maxie, it's a whole little text section, which is very difficult but really fun in my opinion. I really love how this is a lot like Sister Location, but somehow like Sister Location on steroids. It's really good. The gameplay really keeps you on your toes. You can't really casually play this game, as you must get really good, as it tests your skills in the best way possible, giving a lot of challenges, especially on those later nights. And honestly, the mechanics flow so well together. It really advises you to use the camera system, as you must check for any fans that are broken over time. And honestly, the gameplay is just a lot of fun. The game is heavily detailed with its own plot. It's really connected to Jolly 2 as a general sequel to Jolly 2, and is definitely the best Jolly game, at least in my opinion, in terms of story, overall gameplay, and of course the After Nights being pretty much like Sister Location on steroids. And if you said that this wasn't a FNAF fan game and never told me if it was made by Scott or not, I would definitely believe that this game was made by Scott, as it's definitely one of those really high-grade games, as we're now going to enter the top 5, which, starting from here, is the best possible FNAF fan games in the entire list. Cracking in the top 5 spot, we have Five Nights at Candy's Remastered, which I'm not sure may offend some of you people, mainly because I've already put Five Nights at Candy's here on the list already, but as very, very low on the list, so you're probably wondering, why in the world am I putting Five Nights at Candy's Remastered so high on the list? And that is because it is pretty much Five Nights at Candy's at its possible best. Of course, being a complete remaster to Five Nights at Candy's 1, and not really all being just a remaster, as I like to think of it as more of a reimagining, as there's a lot more content and the gameplay plays a lot differently from Five Nights at Candy's 1, as a lot of the game's overall difficulty is a lot more difficult, but a lot more enjoyable, as Blaine doesn't suffer from the same issue from Five Nights at Candy's 1, as he would only attack once every night. But of course, in this game, his mechanics are a lot more fixed, as he can possibly attack you twice or even 3 times on the first time he's active, which definitely increases the difficulty, but makes the game a lot more chaotic, and a lot more like FNAF 2, as the game is chaotic, but a lot of fun, as Five Nights at Candy's, the original one, was still pretty fun, but of course, the mechanics were somewhat flawed in some ways, but in this game, it really fixed those flaws with a lot of the mechanics, gameplay, and of course, being an overall remaster in general, of course, including a brand new night in the form of a glitch night that you get from a code from the rat, which of course unlocks you Camera 13, and of course is pretty much a boss battle with Shadow Candy, and of course leaving on a cliffhanger for Five Nights at Candy's 4, which will be coming out very soon, I hope. So yeah, really hyped for that, and this is the number 5 spot. Let's get into the number 4 spot. At the number 4 spot, we have the infamous infamous Juniors, which I've got to say, this is most definitely the most unique FNAF fan game on this entire list in terms of mechanics and gameplay, as you're actually searching for specific haunted animatronics and of course calling that out, as you must also maintain their stability by calling them over and fixing their boxes, which is really freaking cool and an interesting idea to look at it, as you must check the cameras and use them accordingly to find out who is specifically haunted, as you must search for either handprints, the camera moving on its own, or flashing, which is really freaking cool. I really love Juniors. It is definitely by far the most interesting and most unique FNAF fan game on the entire list, as there's also it has its own story revolving around you, the player, and of course Paul Bear, while you guys also must deal with a vengeful spirit, as this game also links itself to the Five Nights at Freddy's storyline, with of course being the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 origin story, seeing what happens after or before Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and what actually happens at the Juniors place, which you can actually see Juniors in a Five Nights at Freddy's 6 minigame. But yes, definitely the most interesting, and it even has its climactic ending at the end, as it's quite literally Five Nights at Freddy's 2, of course, after reaching 3 a.m. though, of course, switching to a climactic battle with the ghost and a destroyed Mangle at the very end, which is really freaking cool. Very good way to end the game, and of course, has that really cool confrontation with the ghost and the claymation cutscenes being extremely cute, really cool, and somewhat creepy, and honestly, everything about this game is near perfect, and that's all I can say about these top 3 next games. So let's get on to number 3. At the number 2 spot, we have the Return to Freddy's 2 Winter Wonderland, which is pretty much a lot like Five Nights at Freddy's 2 on steroids, kind of like how Jolly 3 is to Sister Location, as it plays a lot like Five Nights at Freddy's 2, but there's a lot of more interesting mechanics here, like a generator that must be fixed every now and then when it goes off. Or of course the introduction of 2 new characters, that being Sugar and Doug the dog, as Sugar acts a lot like Foxy, where you gotta flash him, but she can also enter your room, meaning you have to put on the mask in order to stop her. As for Doug, he'll appear in your right or left when he leaves the stage, as you must use a dog whistle on top of your screen to send him back, which is really freaking interesting. And again, the game's a lot like Five Nights at Freddy's 2, but of course, in my opinion, a lot better, as it does what FNAF 2 does, but more with the generator and 2 new characters. As for the rest of the other characters, is of course just shining the light at Foxy, and of course using the mask for the rest of them. But the interesting story of the game is really cool, and especially with the Night 6 conclusion of the game, with a climactic battle with Spring Bonnie and Fredbear, along with Shadow Frankbert, is really freaking cool. And I love the addition to the after night scenes, like with repairing the generator while having to hold off Freddy, and of course having to fix Frankbert, and of course leave the building with the key gameplay minigames is just really freaking cool. Adds a lot more gameplay and replay value to the game. Of course, the extra section is very interesting, as this is one of those only FNAF games that actually has a possible 20 mode, as I defeated the 20 mode, as I thought it was nearly impossible before I actually eventually beat it. This is definitely one of my personal favorite FNAF fan games out there. And of course, I love the little touch with the mask being a Bonnie mask instead of a Freddy mask. But yeah, pretty much perfect in most ways, as it's pretty much just FNAF 2, but a lot better. But with that said though, let's get on to number 2. At number 2, what was originally going to be number 1 if it weren't for a specific FNAF fan game coming out just so recently, number 2 is going to be the Tubbyland Archives Act 1, which is by far my most personal favorite FNAF fan game of all time, other than number 1, as it's extremely interesting, especially with its story, as it keeps you on your toes as the nights progress. This is definitely not casual friendly, as it really does ask the most out of the player in terms of difficulty, as you must bring your A game. It tests your skills in Five Nights at Freddy's fan games, which I really enjoy these more difficult Five Nights at Freddy's fan games, as I got stuck in some places like FNAF, like Night 4 or Night 6, but made it through the game, even beat the most hardest mode, which also gives you a secret cutscene, which also teases the next game in the series, the Tubby Land Archives Act 2, as this is actually a sole remastered series from the original Tubby Land games, which I'm really interested in. I really love the story of the game and the gameplay. I love the whole Secret Knight X, which is which really changes things and is a climactic battle against pretty much all the animatronics stitched together as you play as the CEO of this place. As honestly, it's all really freaking cool. The gameplay is really good, and the game's really difficult and tests your abilities at Five Nights at Freddy's fan games. And honestly, the gameplay, the mechanics, everything looks so well done, so really good. The story really kept me drawn in as I wanted to keep continuing this game just to find out what happens next, and is just a lot of fun. Really love this game. But anyways, onto the #1 spot. Finally, at the #1 spot, the FNAF fan game I think is by far the closest to perfection is the return to Bloody Nights. Definitely deserves the #1 spot. This game is just phenomenal as its story links completely into the FNAF storyline, as I am willing to just, without Scott's approval, just see this game as the prequel to the entire Five Nights at Freddy's storyline, as it gets a lot of the Five Nights at Freddy's lore correct, with taking place at Fredbear's Family Diner, of course, including William Afton and his business partner Henry Emily, and where the game pretty much takes place around Fredbear's Family Diner in 1983, and of course is really freaking cool. The gameplay itself is really fun, really challenging on the later nights, with of course a possible 20 mode and really creepy dialogue as things just shit the bed as the nights progress. And honestly, the story cannot get any more close to perfect to the FNAF story, as everything in the story of this game is really accurate to what happens in the actual Fredbear's Family Diner in Five Nights at Freddy's in the Five Nights at Freddy's series. Honestly, this game is just near perfect. It gets a lot of the lore right. A lot of the secret cutscenes are really worth trying to obtain, as I have obtained most of the secret endings for this game already. And of course, the gameplay keeps you on your toes, especially with the later nights, and honestly has a lot of replay value with all the different challenges, the custom night, and all that. It's definitely very interesting, and one of the only FNAF fan games that actually creeped me out again, brought me back the scares, as just the movements and really well done swift gameplay really creeps me out some of the time, especially with the atmosphere taking place at this old Fredbear's Family Diner. It's just extremely well done, near perfect FNAF game, and I would believe this if it was a prequel to the original Five Nights at Freddy's storyline, as I would go as far as to say it is a prequel to the Five Nights at Freddy's storyline, without it, of course, being the prequel, as it is just a FNAF fan game, but revolving around exactly what happens to be in Fredbear's Family Diner. But with that said, the Return to Bloody Nights is #1 by far. Let me know what you guys thought of the list below. Make sure to watch part 1 as well. I'll be leaving a link to that in the description below. But hey, let me know in the comments down below if you agree with my list. Let me know where I got it right. Let me know where I got it wrong. Let me know what you guys think is the best FNAF fan game that I've played on my channel. But with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification button so you never miss a video. This has been my every single FNAF fan games worst to best video. So with that said, hope you guys have a great day and or night, and I'll see you guys in the next video stream and or post. Later, Gators!